Great. It's a pleasure to have you again with us, Dr. Seteolu from the Department of Political Science, Lagos State University. It's a pleasure to have you on Sahara TV once again, sir.
Thank you.
Let's start with our first question today, and that has to do with your perception. How do you interpret the decision of the Nigerian senators to share holiday allowances amidst the backdrop of increasing poverty levels in the country?
Well, I need to make this initial comment. I suppose the President of Senate made a slip. Well, he corrected it. I mentioned the lighting mood. He later said he sent prayers to the phones. Okay, so the deduction I'll make from it is there's no official document. I'm not aware of a document officially, that XYZ allowance has been paid to the senators. We're speculating. I do not doubt, however, that the Senate and the political class have contempt for the Nigerian people. Now, and the fact that the political class have shown utter disregard for the dismal socioeconomic levels Nigerians have condescended into. It should not amaze Nigerians, knowing full well that most of the politicians are sponsored by godfathers who fund the campaigns, who fund the elections. So the logic is, I would expect that whoever emerges, either as a member of the House of Reps or a member of Senate, will likely owe allegiance to the godfathers rather than the electorate or the Nigerian people. So it probably explains to some extent the contempt of the Nigerian people. Okay? It probably explains the contempt, and the disregard. The second level is the increasing cost of government. I rather describe it as increasing cost of government, rather deliberately. I know the commonly used words are cost of governance, but I insist as a political scientist that the issue is the problematic is not the cost of governance; it is the cost of government. Governance at the conceptual level has as a primary, a fundamental and connotative meanings. To expropriate resources, to build roads or construct schools, develop infrastructures, to build industries or factories are aspects of governance. So the increasing cost is not about governance. It's about the cost of government, the structures and institutions of governments, and the actors who are found therein, in terms of their wages and salaries, etc., etc. Again, it raises the issue about the form of government and the system of government Nigeria practices. The presidential system will appreciate emanated from the United States. It actually originated within America's historiography. America is rich and affluent and the foremost economy, etc., etc. So American economy could sustain it. Can sustain it and will sustain it, apparently till eternity, But it is obvious that Nigeria's political economy at the downturn of the 21st century can no longer sustain the presidential system of government.
Now, let me just quickly chip on this. Earlier on, you stated that you're not aware that there is a documentary of evidence and the fact that the Senate President Akpabio actually retracted that statement. We had a report yesterday that each senator actually received not less than 2 million as allowance before proceeding on the 7 weeks vacation. In fact, a senator who requested not to be named because he was not authorized to by the upper chamber spoke on the matter and confirmed that all the 109 senators were paid the allowance for the holidays which commenced on Monday. What's your reaction to these senators' confirmation of the fact that yes, they actually got paid?
Well, I read I read similar stories, but I'm reluctant as a scientist to rely on those stories. It could be denied. I and I understand the issue further. Why are we amazed at this? 2 million is twice split to the salaries and allowances Nigerians have speculated that members of the House of Reps and Senate get. So why are we getting furious about 2 million?
But
When it's speculated that a member of the House of Reps probably gets about 14 million and a member of Senate gets far more.
in the light of the economic challenges being faced by many Nigerians,
Yes.
what message does this move send to the general public? I mean, how might it affect the perception of the public?
I mean, it will not make it that different to the perception of the Nigerian public. How do I mean? The perception is there's this perception that's pervasive that the governing class do not represent the Nigerian people. Do not ventilate the interests of the Nigerian people. There's a perception which is dominant that the political class, the governing class particularly, is alienated from the people, distant from the people. There's a perception that this governing class, asks the Nigerian people to make sacrifices or it lives affluent life. So what happened a few days ago is a corroboration of that seemingly dominant perception. It is not new. It is not new.
Now, if I may ask you, Doctor, what factors do you think contributed to this senator's decision? I mean, to distribute this kind of holiday salary hours, particularly at this time, and what are the implications of this decision to their respective constituents?
Well, do you know what? I'm not surprised again. I imagine that the members of National Assembly, often get this kind of allowance, which is not known to the public and which is not which is often in the public domain. Okay, it is not new. I visited Abuja a few times last year. I was at the Transcorp Hotel, and I sighted members of the National Assembly at a distance within the hotel, and I was amazed at their lifestyle, the affluent lifestyle, and so on and so forth. Well, maybe I wasn't amazed, but my perception were reinforced by the affluent lifestyle I witnessed. So it's not new. It's not new. I suppose that the executive is romanticizing about a legislature that will be a rubber stamp. I suppose what the executive, I rather speculate is a bait, a sustained bait. It's been there. That's why I'm using the word sustained bait. But the executive to continue to dominate, to continue to dominate governmental system. In terms of the locus of power, the National Assembly ought to be a check, on the executive, on the exercise of executive powers. But in this context, the National Assembly has become somewhat subordinate, and it lacks the courage, it lacks the political will, it lacks the capacity, to provide the requisite check on the organ of government that expropriates and appropriates, resources, and political patronage, etc.
Now, Doctor, you've actually commented this earlier on when you say there seems to be a disconnect between the ruling elite and the Nigerian masses, as a matter of fact. And some have actually argued and agreed with what you just said, that the senator's actions actually highlight a disconnect between the political elites and the general population. Do you agree with this assessment? And if so, how can this gap be bridged?
The assessment has stated the obvious. The power structure in Nigeria is such that those who owns resources legally acquired or otherwise, control the party structures and controls the machinery of government and determines who gets what, when and how. Okay? So so in the long term, the power relations is such that, and the locus of power is not vested in the people. Theoretically, the people ought to be the popular sovereign. But in concrete terms, in terms of the praxis, popular sovereignty has been hijacked and appears relocated in some fractions of the governing class. Some fractions of the governing class, determines who gets what and how. So and that explains why the political class beyond the governing class are arrogant and treat the Nigerian people with contempt and disdain, knowing full well that their power, not authority, emanates from the godfathers and the funders of the political machinery.
Now, Doctor, how might civil society groups and opposition parties, grassroots movements leverage this issue in order to drive political change or advocate for better governance?
Well,
for example, we have the SERAP actually going ahead, for example, to sue the members of the national senators with regards to these allowances. I mean, what other moves should civil society groups and other, movements should do in order to leverage on these actions?
Well, my initial reaction is this. Well, there's been decline of social movement in Nigeria. Yeah, there's been decline of social movement. Social movements, particularly in the 70s and 80s, were ideological. And the social movements led by the trade centers, alternative social and economic constructs to state-led high-level urban policies. About the 90s, social movements were infiltrated, by the militations, including the student movement, and and we had less of posing alternative constructs, and less of alternative ideologies, and reactionaries and rightists, became dominant and got to control structures, at those levels. So and we had a somewhat shift from social movements to civil society. Organizations. Most of the civil society organizations are state-led and state-funded. And most of these groups, I'm afraid, except a few, canvass positions that sustains the dominance of the political class. Very few canvass, alternative positions. Very few canvass leftist ideology, for instance. Very few canvass socialism. Very few canvass revolutionary change. In fact, most of the civil society groups will rather canvass, liberal ideas, to sustain funding sources, etc., etc. The character of the political class, it is defined by the nature of the state. It does appear that the Nigerian state has been captured. It does appear that the Nigerian state has been hijacked. And guess what? We need to reconstruct, to deconstruct and reconstruct the Nigerian state, in terms of its politics and the economy, would require equally fundamental political actions. And you take more than civil society, in my view. To take more than civil society, to take more than advocacy. Yes, it will require, We need to pursue class-based politics, and in the long run, class-based action. And class-based action as against political action.
Now, how do you mean when you talk about class-based actions in this regard?
Yes, class-based action in the sense that the extent economic structure and superstructure in Nigeria is constituted are anti-people, are anti-poor, okay, and will not foster growth and development. We need to supplant through revolutionary means. We need to supplant the extant political economy and substitute it with an alternative that works in the interests of the working people, the urban poor, and the peasants. The idea about civil society, what we've been able to achieve, are somewhat reforms, and in some instances tokenism. The advocacies are not eating at the fundamentals of Nigeria's political economy. We need to challenge the status quo antebellum as it is. We need to replace it. Nigeria, ironically, is not an autonomous capitalist state. If it were autonomous, it would probably be like South Korea or Singapore. It's a dependent peripheral capitalist state. And it is deliberately organized, to remain underdeveloped and peripheral. We need to alter the country's status in the international political economy. How do we go about it? We cannot achieve those goals within the framework of IMF, World Bank, philosophies. These are the points I'm making.
Now, Doctor, are there any potential policy changes that you feel, or reforms that could be recommended to prevent our members of the National Assembly, arbitrarily allocating allowances for themselves in order to prevent these kind of situations arising in the future, and to ensure that the interests of the Nigerian people are better represented as far as governance is concerned?
I suppose we cannot. We should alter the political system. The political system in this sense is a presidential system. Okay? Democracy is a form of government. The scholar insists, let fools contend that there's nothing like the best form of government. What is best administered is best. Okay? I said that within context. The democracy Nigeria practices is not rooted in Nigeria's historicity. And critics are questioning the democracy, that lacks political legitimacy. Okay? They're questioning the democracy that rarely gives dividends, of democracy. They're questioning the democracy that alienates, the Nigerian people from the state and the state actors as a result of, election malpractices and politicization of the judiciary. We create a perception that the institutions of government suffer deficits, suffer ethical deficits, etc., etc. The presidential system is a political superstructure that the democracy thrives on, and we cannot alter the presidential system without amending the constitution. How could we possibly amend the constitution, with the behaviors, of the members of the National Assembly? I'm afraid the members of the National Assembly will likely subvert it. Such provision or amendment process that suggests alternative political system. The question is, which is the alternative political system? Should we be prescribing the parliamentary or cabinet system? We had the cabinet system in the First Republic, and it collapsed in 65-66. Okay, after the 1964 general elections. And you recall some critiques sees that the parliamentary system actually exacerbated regionalism and ethnic politics in Nigeria. Should we revert to a political system that will exhibit politicization of ethnicity? Or should we continue with the presidential system that exhausts our scarce resources on state actors and the superstructure? The bottom line is, we need to rethink the political system. We should consider adopting a political system that reflects our history, our culture, our historiography. And which presupposes that we need to discuss in whole sometimes, the structure, the form, the nature, and the foundations of Nigeria's political economy. We're far from it. We need modern reforms. We need radical change.
Doctor, let's get your reaction on this. And critics have said that Senator Akpabio is considered to be the worst ever Senate president in Nigeria's history, considering his recent achievements so far, in quotes. First, making fun of Nigerians' hardship with the allow the poor breathe joke, and rubber stamping Tinubu's controversial ministerial list without due scrutiny, and sharing money to senators for holidays on live TV. I mean, virtually most critics in Nigeria say that this current Senate president comes in with huge corruption charges, baggages, and do you expect anything different? And do you see this National Assembly becoming another rubber stamp for the executive arm of government?
You're stating the obvious. Why should we be optimistic about the National Assembly? Why should we? We should not be optimistic. I suspect that the current National Assembly will sustain the status quo and the politics of the belly, which had pervaded Nigeria's politics.
Yeah. Great, Scott.